Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Top 10 Things to Do to Prevent Data Breach. We have three outstanding presenters today, Brandon Absher, Trent Gill, and Adam Gwaltney. I'll tell you a little bit more about them shortly, but first I would like to share a few housekeeping notes to help make this as valuable a presentation as possible. First, while we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation, most will be answered at the end. If you find you have a question along the way, you can ask it in the question box on the lower portion of your screen. Additionally, you will find a Resources tab on the lower left. It has today's slides available for download. Finally, for the purposes of continuing education, you will notice a periodic question box appear on your screen. This is simply to confirm attendance and attentiveness. Please be sure to answer those questions when they appear. Additionally, a secret word will be revealed at some point during the presentation. You will be asked to provide that secret word in your evaluation, which will appear on your screen once the presentation is over. Should you have to close out of the presentation prior to its end, you will miss out on the evaluation and therefore your credit. All right, let's move on to today's presentation. Today's presentation, along with other online educational opportunities, is offered to AltaPro as a special service to you by Reminger. Additionally, Reminger offers an exclusive hotline that provides informal consultation on a variety of topics, including cyber liability, which we'll discuss today. We encourage you to reach out to them whenever you have questions. Our three presenters, as I mentioned earlier, are Brandon Absher, Trent Gill, and Adam Gwaltney. Brandon focuses his practice on civil litigation, workers' compensation, and data breach privacy matters. A certified information privacy professional by the International Association of Privacy Professionals, Brandon has received special training in data breach and privacy fields. Trent counsels clients on a variety of legal issues, including labor and employment, insurance coverage, contract creation and negotiation, workers' compensation, and risk management. He practices out of the firm's Indianapolis office and maintains a diverse practice focusing on civil litigation. Adam is a Vertman and Associates and specializes in numerous types of professional liability insurance, including legal professional liability, title, agents, and errors and omissions, and cyber liability insurance. He is a frequent speaker and also contributes to several law publications. Trent, I believe you'll take it away from here.
Yes, thank you, Kim. We have a lot of topics to cover, and here's the list, if you will, the top 10. So I'll just quickly skim through these, and then we'll cover them in detail as we go throughout this presentation. The top 10, starting with number 1, conduct a professional security assessment, and we'll discuss this throughout the webinar, and that is essentially to do an audit, review where you're at and need to go, and brainstorm possibly with any IT professional, whether that's a consultant or in-house employee. Develop and implement cyber event response plan. We'll discuss that as well. It's important to have a plan and to practice it. Adam will explore those things with you. Stay current with technology. That's kind of self-explanatory, but to have either IT that again is an employee or a consultant to advise you and on current hardware, software, and any updates, and to do it on an ongoing basis. Implement intrusion detection methods. We'll discuss that. Mobile device management. Most of us now are carrying around either by laptop or various other files, whether it's a flash drive, thumb drives, or your smartphone that are subject to data breaches. We'll discuss those things. Train your staff. That is also kind of self-explanatory, but you need to make sure that everyone from the receptionist at your firm to anybody in billing to any employee, all the way up through lawyers, as you'll see when we get to social engineering fraud, that it's not gullibility, but essentially that oftentimes I don't even want to call it a weakest link, but you're susceptible to people who want to trust those that are trying to prey on them, and it's not necessarily that the person is ignorant or gullible, but that they just haven't learned to recognize the signs of a potential cyber risk or breach. Stay abreast of legal compliance. We'll talk about rules 1.1, 1.6, and essentially those are the 2 C's, competence and confidentiality. Backup, backup, backup. Make sure your systems are backed up. So if you do suffer a breach, that you have a way to access information that's not linked into anything that has been compromised. Emails, passwords, we'll discuss those things, and then Adam will cover in detail any insurance and risk transfer that's available in today's market. What is a cyber event? How do we define it? First of all, it's not necessarily that a breach has occurred, but an attempted breach. Adam, I believe you might have some things to say about this, on what the definition is.
Yeah, for years,
Hello?
Trent, have you got me? You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So for years in, the data breach world, we've heard of just data breach, and data breach response plans, and we've heard, about these massive data breaches with these massive companies. But in the legal professional world, a couple years ago, at least from our agency, we thought that needed to change. So we called it a cyber event because there's so many different things that can hit a law firm that's not a data breach. It can be social engineering fraud, which I know we're going to talk about. It can be wire funds transfer fraud. It can be a ransom attack. Extortion attacks are now on the increase. Business interruption losses due to an event. So we tell our clients and our trade groups now that it's just not a data breach. It can be a lot of other things.
And this is Brandon. One thing I would add, it can even be as simple as negligently sending an email to the wrong recipient with an attachment that has some personal data on it. That's going to fall under a cyber event as well.
Yeah, or I think Pam, who might be I'm sure is on the line, actually mentioned to me something about a flash drive being sent in the mail through unsecured ways or whatever. But it could even be through FedEx or UPS where it gets lost, and hopefully it's encrypted with password protections. But that's a cyber event. Conduct a security assessment, and this is the audit. Basically, looking where you're at and where you need to go. Adam, do you have some things to discuss on this point as well?
Yeah, again, one of our biggest, discussions with clients is, you have to assess what you have, where it's at. So do you store it in-house? Do you store it, out of house, offline? Who has access to it? And when or if you lose it, how do you, recapture it or shut it down? And then how we recover. And also insurance plays a part here as far as, do you have insurance coverages and notifications, and, who do we contact if we have an issue? So the incident response plan, which you note here in the second point, is absolutely critical to have no matter what size of firm that you have. And I know smaller firms, 1 or 2 people may wear multiple hats in an event response plan. But one of the critical things about an event response plan is you have to have a mock disaster. You have to test it. You have to understand who does what, and does everybody understand their role in how a disaster is handled.
And this is Brandon. One thing I would add on this point is I work a lot with smaller, small, medium-sized businesses. They don't have the IT department that you have with these major corporations when you read about these data breaches. They actually might not have an IT department at all. They might have, the owner of the company might just handle the IT and the server issues. So one issue I try to tell clients about is there's a lot of companies out there, a lot of IT specialists and consultants that will come in typically for a flat fixed rate fee and do an assessment of your business. That way you're not putting out the expense of hiring some full-time IT person, but you can have someone come in, take a look, see where your potential weaknesses are, both from a technology standpoint and also from a policies and procedures standpoint, and kind of lets you know what fixes you should implement before you have to go out and spend a bunch of money.
Right, and to that point, this is Trent again, to be able a part of the planning, of course, is budgeting for some of these things, and we'll discuss that, but making sure that you do have a place in your budget where you can squeeze in and you can figure out software, hardware, and that follows an audit, essentially, and consulting, essentially, you know, and that doesn't even necessarily mean that you have somebody on payroll. Stay current with technology. I think we've all heard about how fast technology and, you know, chips, for example, or, you know, the memory capacity on computers is doubling, whatever they say it is, every few years. I mean, I think I heard every 4 years a computer is obsolete almost. But so it's very important for you to stay up to date on the current technology, whether that's, you know, your hardware, but firewalls, antivirus, spyware, and that goes along with the audit that we talked about. And you're going to wait. Once you invest in that hardware, you're going to want to make sure it stays up to date. And oftentimes, of course, a lot of these companies will provide free updates to their software. So I think, you know, as far as updating, and I would throw it out there to Brandon and you know, Adam, as far as the software goes, at least every 6 months you need to have some sort of review about where you are at and whether updates are properly installed and whether or not you need to replace hardware.
That's correct. I mean, I think one thing I would add is a lot of, you know, I work with a lot of people and they don't really kind of understand the whole cloud system and how that works, and you know, where the data is stored and how that can impact you. And you know, everything's moving to the cloud. You know, and I think that does provide a lot of benefits to people, because a lot of this software, a lot of these protections, your data can be stored, you know, via paying some sort of monthly fee to another company. They can handle the heavier data protection risk, you know, protecting the data, which I think is a big benefit to smaller to medium-sized companies, that they don't have to go out and necessarily spend all the money on this hardware anymore when you have all these cloud services that are offered. So that's an area that I really kind of recommend to people in terms of record retention and data, is exploring the cloud software issues if price is a major concern for your company.
Yeah, and when we're I'm sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say one thing about your current with technology, and Brandon kind of hit it about budget. You know, one of the things that we see in Indiana is a lot of our firms just don't know where to start, and they don't know who to contact. And actually, we just received a question from an audience member on doing a system audit and who to contact. But in Indiana, the solo small firm section through the Indiana State Bar, they have a fantastic network of lawyers that are very, very savvy with technology. And so I would say to the firms in the audience that speaking to your current business partners, you know, your insurance providers, your technology people, and your peers on, you know, maybe where to start with some of this stuff. For example, if you don't have a firewall, or if you haven't upgraded your antivirus in a decade, and you just don't know where to go, and maybe you don't have an IT provider, maybe, you know, you're a solo or a small shop and you guys do it all in-house, and you're going to these webinars and seminars and going, okay, where do we start? So starting locally, I think, is a good spot.
Right, and I was just going to say, your consultants that you bring in to advise you regarding these things, whether it's the cloud, whether it's additional firewall protection, other software, when you replace these things, obviously it's important to recycle them properly, right? I mean, I think we all can understand that, at least that, in other words, you'd be told, like, when we're replacing all hardware, and that includes, you know, flash drives, thumb drives, things like that, cell phones that are obsolete, I don't know, all of that stuff is carrying protected information, and you're going to have to make sure that you recycle them properly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with the way technology is changing, and I think a lot of the smaller companies used to be concerned about costs of this, but the costs are really not that bad anymore. Things are changing. It's just, it used to be the adage that smaller companies would kind of stick their head in the sand and ignore these issues, but it's just not possible anymore. And there's a lot of affordable options out there that can protect data and keep you current to date. I mean, I recently had a issue with a client who was a small company. They had basically 3 employees, 3 different computers, and they weren't networked at all or behind sort of firewall, but how they kind of accessed and saved data was they literally had one flash drive, which they would pass around and save stuff to, and if somebody needed it, they would go borrow the flash drive, give it back to that person. I couldn't believe somebody was still doing that today, and that creates all sort of privacy and security issues with that. But the technology is changing a lot. The cloud is a cheap option in terms of that, and even the hardware is not as expensive as it used to be.
Yeah, and when I mentioned properly recycling these things, if you go to a reputable vendor where you're buying actual hardware, laptops, flash drives, cell phones, desktops, whatever, many of them will offer you as a part of their service. I guess I would, throw that out to Adam and Brandon as well, but they'll offer proper wiping services as well for your old hardware, so that you're not basically throwing away data for the bad guys to get, basically.
Yeah.
Intrusion detection methods. I think, Adam, this is primarily you in your discussion about these various programs available, Barracuda and other things.
Yeah, there's a couple, when we talk to our trade groups, we talk a lot about intrusion detection methods, and there's a couple that are...
sorry, Adam, can you just explain what it is, first of all, intrusion detection method?
Sure. An intrusion detection method is basically a burglar alarm. It's a security system on your home. It's the alarm on your car that when someone, enters your space, an alarm goes off. Or a detection device goes off. This could be, a siren, a light, a horn, or whatever, if it's our home, auto, or business. In the cyber world, it's generally a lockdown of the system, or a warning balloon window, or an algorithm that's detected by your IT security people. It could be a combination of all of those things. So an intrusion detection method is generally just a software or an application of some sort that tells you when or if a bad guy or some sort of intrusion is coming through your system. So I talk about 2 in particular that we use, and one is called Barracuda. And the best way I can describe it is it's a software that's attached to your internet search engine. And when you type in a URL or a website, it basically goes behind the curtain and it scrubs the website before it allows you to go there. And if it detects anything out of the normal, malware, spyware, viruses, pictures that are infected in some way, it will prevent you from going to that website. It'll put up a warning window with a screen that prevents you to go there. Now, in our system, you can circumvent that and still go there. We don't do that. We'll basically send the URL over to our IT folks and say, hey, I'm researching a law firm or a carrier or whatever. Can you clear this for me? And sometimes they'll answer back and say, no, it's infected with malware, or they'll release it and let you go there. So Barracuda is just an open market software. And I'm sure there are probably other branded names like that, but that's the one we use. The other one is called CryptoStopper, and it's designed for ransom attacks. And if you're still on mapped drives, MAPPED, so you host your own server, Brandon talked about the cloud, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if you're not in the cloud and you still have mapped drives, crypto viruses affect those mapped drives. Well, CryptoStopper, the software, the intrusion method, basically puts fake or false folders in those drives, and it has a tripwire, basically, an electronic tripwire inside. And when an intrusion or a virus or a ransom attack comes in and trips that wire, it shuts your system down to minimize damage. These are absolutely spectacular softwares. They're not expensive, relatively speaking, but those are just two of the types of intrusion detection methods that we use. And again, the audience, I would recommend reaching out to your IT folks or maybe a peer and see if they're using something.
This is Trent. Along the lines of Barracuda, and you mentioned software for internet searching, and I would imagine, a lot of people on the line, I guess, and I do it myself, even though my firm has some decent resources in terms of legal research, like Lexis or Westlaw. But oftentimes, if I want a quick answer, I don't even want to use this service, and maybe you don't have it, and you just are using free online research through Google or something. But that's something to be definitely to consider when you're going to various websites. And oftentimes, your research is done through just general Google or internet searches, as opposed to secure websites like Westlaw or Lexis.
This is Brandon real quick. I'll answer one of the questions that's out there. Don Kite asked, do a majority of firms, including small firms, now use encryption software when sending emails? That's a good question. That's a kind of a trend that's starting to kind of pick up speed. I would not say it's becoming common quite yet. I do think in the next couple of years it will become common. I think the days of just sending off some medical records attached to an email to somebody else, I think those days are probably numbered. I know everybody still does it. And kind of getting back to that is, I see a lot of larger governmental agencies are requiring that now. If you send anything related to HIPAA or any medical documents, that's all coming out in some sort of encrypted email. Some bigger companies are, but it hasn't totally transitioned down to kind of the mid to small size firms. I will say, like here at Reminger, we have if you're using regular Outlook, there's no really way to encrypt it, but we have a kind of a cloud document management system, and there's a way using that system to actually send an encrypted email. So again, that's getting back to some cloud-based software options to solve that problem.
Brandon, I would add one thing to that, and I apologize. I jumped the gun. I answered Don's question. What we've seen on the solo small firm, even the larger firm side, just in the practical world of practicing law, there's been a pretty big objection for years for law firms encrypting their emails due to the cumbersome nature on the client side, that there's been a pretty big argument from the law firm side. And I get it. I totally get it, that if they encrypt everything, then the client is going to have to, use user IDs and, passwords. And the argument is, how can we make it a smooth, workable thing for the client side? But you're right. I agree with you. In a couple years, I think it's just going to be a given that law firms are going to have to encrypt their data.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll be the first to admit that when I get one of those emails and I have to create a new password and remember another 5,000 passwords I have to remember to do anything nowadays, it's frustrating, and it takes longer than just clicking and opening an email. But I do think within the next few years it's going to become the standard.
Moving on to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Adam.
There's a couple questions about our secret word. You're quarterbacking, Trent, so I'm not sure when you want to mention the secret word.
I guess I could do it right now, and that secret word, courtesy of Adam and his, I think, viewing of Four Christmases, is mistletoe.
Mistletoe.
The secret word is mistletoe. So moving on to mobile device management. So here, obviously, most of, I guess, what I'm doing now, I consider myself, on the road a lot, and I am on the road a lot and using my laptop or flash drives or my, mobile device, smartphones, or is the proper use of that. And when you do your initial audit, of course, you can kind of get an idea whether it's, from your IT personnel or person that, proper use of these things in today's society. I mean, these things link up obviously with your system usually. So if they're linked up and they're plugged into your network, especially if it's, you talked about something in the cloud versus mapped, that you could have the potential to pull all of the data onto that source, and that would be available for the bad guys. So, essentially it's as simple as we just talked about it, encrypted data to be downloaded to portable storage devices. In fact, I'm trying to think of a flash drive I have right now that doesn't have some sort of password with requirement for encryption. I know that I mentioned at the outset a story about, a flash drive being sent, and, when the client received the flash drive through regular mail, there was no flash drive in the envelope. And so obviously we don't, you don't know where that information has been, where it fell into. Likely it's not into any bad guy's hands, but who knows? It's been compromised, and that's that cyber event we talked about. It should be encrypted with password protections, and then also, of course, common sense says, you're going to want to track, if you're mailing any of these things through the mail, you'd want to use a tracking system through FedEx or UPS or something like that. And I don't know if Brandon or Adam has anything else to add about mobile device management.
Yeah, mobile device management is difficult right now, and one of the most common claims that we see now with cybersecurity and technology malpractice is mobile devices. Whether they've had a stolen laptop, I can't tell you how many phone calls and claims I've seen now with stolen or lost smartphones. And you ask the client, what their password was, and it's, Colts or 1234. Do not use a default password, folks. Make the password difficult. Change it from time to time if you can. But one short story real quick. This last year, actually, I had 2 cyber technology claims where the law firm terminated paralegals. Both paralegals, 2 totally different firms, totally different parts of the state, both walked out with mountains of attorney-client privilege information downloaded to flash drives. They were going to hold.
Flash drives are very, very dangerous.
Yeah, you're right, Brandon. So, if you terminate someone, you have to go into their system immediately, scrub the system, determine if they've, downloaded anything, but only because both of these firms had a dedicated IT person, a third party that was at both small law firms. They came in and ran a search on the system and saw the download. They were able to get the flash drives back, but man, they were panicked for a while.
Staff training, we talked a little bit about this, and we've kind of been highlighting it throughout. It's important from, like I said, the person who's the lowest on the totem pole, your receptionist, if you will, or whoever that is. All personnel, employees, human resources need to have some training in this stuff, and we'll talk about phishing scams and things like that you could, it doesn't even have to be a receptionist or a secretary or an admin or whoever. Lawyers fall for these things. In fact, it's happened in my firm, but you have to, in order to recognize telltale signs of these things, your staff has to be trained. And you need to set aside time on a quarterly basis, I think. And we tend to do them, if we're going to discuss these things at our firm, we tend to do them first thing in the morning. Otherwise, people get distracted, and it's a little bit easier to do. You bring in coffee and donuts, and you talk about them for 15 minutes. That's all it really takes on a quarterly basis, just to make sure that everybody is understanding, updates that if, for example, you're going to want to do it if you're doing an audit of your system and you got new software, new hardware, everybody is working and things are working smoothly. And Adam mentioned to do a test and to make sure that everyone is trained from the top down to the bottom.
And this is Brandon. I would add in terms of the testing, there's actually some companies out there that you can pay. It's a very small fee, and they will actually send out phishing emails. You give them basically the email list for your entire, office. They'll send out kind of phishing emails, and there'll be various different emails. Employees will get different. Some will be Dropbox links. Some will be some Google link. Another will just be like a regular link to click on. And if the employee clicks on the link, there's actually no malicious sort of data or any sort of virus on it, but it sends a report back to this company. So then the company then sends you a report and says, well, here's the people who clicked on the link. So it's kind of following up on the training to actually see if it's actually being implemented, and looking at maybe different employees and additional training you need to provide to them.
Yeah,
we'll go through. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say to the audience that if there's any one slide in this entire webinar that they pay attention to, it's this one, because the absolute weakest link in any cybersecurity defense mechanism is the employee and the humans. And I don't care what type of antivirus, I don't care what type of firewall, I don't care what type of intrusion detection methods they have, it's the human being that's the weak link. And we've been in this space now for over a decade, and every single incident and event that we take in, there's a human error attached, and you have to go through the mock disaster. You said it best, Trent. You have to have consistent, ongoing communication, and Brandon said it as well. You have to change the culture of your law firm. As lawyers, you have to know that this is not going away. Professional rules are dictating this. Case law is being established, and lawyers need to change the culture of their firm to embrace cybersecurity. It is scary, but there are tremendous benefits to technology. And so training and awareness is absolutely critical.
No amount of software, hardware investment is going to protect if you don't do any training, I think is the highlight there, right? So
Spot on.
Why waste your money on those sorts of things if people aren't knowledgeable about what's going on? So the legal compliance aspect here, and this is probably the Bible, the ABA Cybersecurity Handbook, and we'll talk about 1.1 and 1.6, the two C's, competency and confidentiality. And then you have obvious other rules that are implicit with HIPAA and the business associate agreements that are required when you're disclosing protected information from a qualified vendor like healthcare providers, or if you're doing service for anything, any doctors or hospitals. Obviously, those are no-brainers. But we could do a whole. I think Brandon and Adam would agree. I mean, you could do a 2-hour seminar just on this alone with HIPAA and BAAs. But wanted to highlight it and make sure that our audience was aware of it. If you look at the professional rules, they do reference the ABA Cybersecurity Handbook frequently in the commentary. Adam or Brandon, any other comments there?
Yeah, this is Brandon. I would say right now, living in the United States, it's tough. I'm not typically a big fan of the European Union, and all their rules and regulations. But one thing they have gotten right is data privacy. The EU's kind of implemented a overarching general data protection regulation, which oversees all the countries, different industries, different companies, and it sets forth technical and organizational requirements. The U.S., on the other hand, is kind of they're kind of still in the Stone Age. It's basically a big hodgepodge of various data privacy laws. As mentioned, there's HIPAA, which everybody knows about. You've got the Gramm-Leach Act, which only applies to financial institutions. You've got FERPA, which applies to educational institutions. And they all have different requirements for data privacy. So it's kind of a mess trying to determine what statute you're falling under depending on what you're working on. You also got a pretty big recent trend recently regarding states implementing their own data breach and data response statutes. California is a big one. They've got kind of an overarching statute that a lot of states are starting to follow. So it's kind of one thing you got to be careful about, especially if you practice in different states. What are the rules and requirements of the individual states you're practicing in terms of if you have a data breach, how do you have to respond, how long do you have to respond? So hopefully there's some big bipartisan push in Congress right now to try to implement something in the United States that's similar to what the EU has, to kind of make it a little bit easier in terms of people trying to figure out what they should operate under in terms of data privacy and data breach. I don't know how long that will take with the speed Congress moves, but there is a push for that right now.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that we have many law firms that have multiple state practices. So in the Northwest Quad of Indiana, you've got lawyers that practice in Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and some in Wisconsin, and that's very common, even small firms. So with that compliance slide, I would just recommend to our audience, if you have multi-state practice, I would probably do it sooner rather than later, as to become abreast of what your data breach laws are in the state that you're practicing in, and add that to your cyber event response plan, so that you know who you may have to contact and when, God forbid, the event ever occurs.
I mean, as simple as a call tree. Is that essentially what you're talking about, Adam? I mean,
exactly it. That's exactly it.
So on our next slide here, backup. What does that mean? Backing up your data. Well, something outside of whether you have your system mapped or your computer system is in the cloud. You're going to want to have something that's backed up, but also backed up outside. So that's what out of band means, essentially, outside of your network, so that if it is compromised, it's as simple as that the bad guys don't have access to everything and you can get work done.
Yeah, backups are critical right now because one of the most common cyber events hitting any business, but especially professional businesses, are ransom attacks still to this day. And most of the ransom attack claims that I'm involved in, they haven't been able to recover quickly because their backups were never checked. Their IT folks said they were backing up, and in fact they were, but the backup was either incomplete or corrupted, and that goes back to the cyber event plan and having a mock disaster. You should probably reach out to your IT folks or check internally to make sure your backups are accurate and complete, and I would probably do that periodically, maybe 2 to 4 times a year if it's cost effective, but backups are critical.
We've already talked at length about this, but it's worth its own slide. The emails, passwords, scams. We put a couple of examples in here. We already talked about thumb or flash drives and the issues there, and then the emails like you see below for wire transfers and other fake emails. And we'll get into social engineering fraud here in a second, but I think we've all seen, as I mentioned, people in my own firm have fallen, victim to these types of emails. And smart people, again, I mean, it's because you want to trust. And for some reason, not for some reason, I mean, the bad guys, if you will, are getting a little bit more savvy in terms of who they're targeting, right? And so they do their research, if you will. And the fake emails aren't as easy to spot as they were anymore. I mean, they're not necessarily rife with misspellings or things like that, and they can be cordial and short. And I put in an example here. This one's directly from my firm. Directed from, so Ron Mingus is the managing partner of the Reminger office here in Indianapolis. And this person here, a colleague of mine, did not fall prey to this scam, but someone else did, and I won't name the person, but this email was sent from Ron just directed to lower, not as senior attorneys in our firm or, associates, if you will. So this person had obviously done some research on who was new to the firm, if you will, and who knew who was in charge and a person that might get some response. And this was directed just to them on iTunes gift cards. And we probably all heard about this phishing scam now, because maybe if you're even checking out at Walmart or CVS or Walgreens now, you see a warning about it. But I can tell you that somebody in our firm fell prey to this and was a victim, and bought a bunch of iTunes gift cards, was getting ready to send them, and then who knows what that would have led to. I don't know if Brandon and Adam have anything on this particular scam or phishing.
I would talk just briefly about a password. I think you hit email pretty good, and I'm sure Brandon's got some good input on passwords. The best advice I've ever received about password management and security was through an FBI cybersecurity expert a few years ago, and he told our class, it was a CLE or CE that I was at, that don't use anything common to yourself at all. Nothing that can be found on social media, no favorite colors, no house numbers, no birth dates, no nothing. And he took us through a couple examples where we had to make up fake passwords. And he said, look around the room that you're in and use obscure words of things or obscure colors or numbers, and make it as difficult and as impersonal as possible. And I've used that advice to this date, and there's some good tutorials on how not to make passwords. Maybe that's for our next webinar, but I would say in password management, make them absolutely as difficult as possible. And I asked him about where to keep my passwords. I keep them on my iPhone under Notes, and there are certain applications that you can subscribe to where you have one password to get into the application, which actually holds all of your additional passwords. So there's a lot of good management tools out there for password management and security.
Social engineering scams. Adam or Brandon, do you want to define what the social engineering scam is? And generally, I would just say it's kind of what we talked about in terms of your human resources, right? And people falling victim to wanting to trust others. And we talked about having appropriate firewalls in place and things like that. Well, none of that is going to make any difference if the bad guy can get in through your human resources, your people. Whether that's the use of, like we talked with some examples here, UPS or Dropbox, scams that we've seen hit our firm, the iTunes gift card scam. I think some of the research I was looking at online, Adam and Brandon, 30% of phishing emails were opened by their intended targets, and that's up from prior years, and you would think it would go down. And that's probably because, go on.
The spoofing of the emails that's a big issue. That's it's tough because they're getting. It used to be you could tell somebody was sending you some ridiculous email because there was misspellings and you could just tell something was up. But they're getting so good now with the way they can spoof someone's email address and make it look like it's popping up and it's from somebody you know. And I know just from being an attorney, you're sitting at your desk, you're doing 40 things in an hour, an email pops up of somebody's name you recognize. You're not looking really closely at the email address to see if it's actually that person. You recognize the name, you click on it, you click on a link, and all of a sudden you've got a problem. So the spoofing is a huge problem. It's not going to go away. All I can tell you is try to take your time. If somebody sends you a link, it's a good idea to try to call them. Did you send me this? What is this? Just to verify it, because it can create a lot of problems.
Yeah, the second most important slide, I think, of this webinar is this slide, second to staff training, because they go hand in hand. And I hope Pam Allen on this webinar to hear this, that she could have another webinar specifically dedicated to social engineering scams. The FBI has identified social engineering as the most rapidly advancing cyber crime against professional businesses, particularly law firms. We've lost count on how many Indiana law firms have been hit by social engineering scams, and it's basically someone posing as someone you know or trust or a business partner trying to get money or services from you. Our agency is social engineered every day. This is the most highly trained issue we have internally in our agency because of the ease of people trusting each other. So as Brandon said, slow down, take your time, trust but verify, but at the same time, I almost don't trust anybody anymore. And man, I'm very careful when I open emails. I make sure I know who it's from, and if it looks odd, if I'm not expecting something from someone, there's a process that we use to verify who it's coming from. But again, that's probably its own hour webinar because it is such a complicated and important thing.
And, it's not just necessarily emails. I'll hit on this quickly. My old firm, we had my secretary, who was smart, extremely loyal, just a great employee, fell victim to a phone call scamming where she was, I can't remember what it was, somebody pretending to be a client, and she was scammed into giving some personal information, date of birth, name, things like that. So, this is all different forms, I should say, right? And I think I was at a seminar one time where somebody talked about, we talked about flash drives. There was somebody that fell victim to a scam where the bad guy had left a flash drive in the parking lot, just waiting for somebody to upload it.
Crazy.
Wow.
So moving on here, these are just some of the more popular ones we've seen regarding social engineering scams, LinkedIn, things like that, anatomy of a legal phishing scam. I don't know, maybe some of the people on the line have seen this email come across, but hopefully not fallen victim to it or preyed to it. But, the common characteristics, the problem here is that oftentimes this seems legitimate. In other words, and I put the steps here that the bad guy or scammer has taken in this type of a phishing scam, where funds are transferred to banks, and then the bank verifies that those funds exist, and then when you ultimately it's you verify and you think that there's real funds in there, but banks have different requirements under the UCC to basically front funds on checks that appear legitimate at the time and then later aren't. When funds, when the bank goes around to really processing those things and then decides and learns it's a bad check, then the lawyers emptied out commingled funds and a trust, and then that triggers all sorts of problems, obviously. Now, if you want to read a little bit more about it, the steps are there, but it's happened. Adam, you've probably seen it.
We've seen this repeatedly. This scam reared its head in Indiana by phone and email back in the mid-2000s. Believe it or not, there were a number of Indiana law firms hit by this scam back in 2005, 2006, and 2007, and it hit a number of firms in central Indiana. It went away for a while, and now it's reared its head again. But they are very sophisticated. They look real. They smell real. But again, to reiterate what Brandon said a few minutes ago on email phishing, slow down, think it through. Most of the time, these windfall things never happen, and you have to verify those funds and let them clear before you draw anything out of that account, because there are a couple clients of mine right now in Indiana that are in a pickle barrel in relation to a couple of these scams.
Well, one quick tip I would add is, some people don't know this, but someone sends you a link, say to Dropbox. If you just put your mouse hover the cursor over the link, it will actually show the website that it's taking you to. And if it's not Dropbox, then you got problems.
Yeah.
Just put your cursor over the link, and it usually reveals itself if it's bad, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
Or it'll look a little bit more suspicious to you. And we mentioned there's the scam of, you received an award or a bar complaint. Let's just put it this way. If it's important enough that the disciplinary commission is really going to investigate you, or you've received that great of an award, it's not going to come in the form of an email. And I can tell you, I'm not aware of a single state in the country that would notify you of a bar complaint through email. So, again, this is kind of common sense, but people do fall victim to it. I mean, even some of my colleagues have, again, fallen victim to these kinds of things. It didn't create serious problems, but we had to call IT and issue, there was definitely some work that was being done after these links or downloads happened. But look, anything that serious or important comes in the form of a phone call or a letter, usually.
Yeah, you're right.
We've kind of in general talked about this, how to reduce your risk, policies in place and training. That's really, that for me is probably the most important thing, that everyone has been trained or is aware of it, these types of things. And heck, you could print off this webinar, the PowerPoints here, and just go through a quick 15-minute tutorial, right? I mean, we've probably provided some of the most popular, social engineering and phishing scams out there, but that's the biggest thing for me. Anything from Brandon or Adam?
No.
Yeah, I would say again that you have to just slow things down. And when I talk to trade groups, I go out and speak on this all the time. I tell the attendees, and it's the attorneys in the firm, it's the managing partners and the practitioners and their paralegals and their law clerks and their staff are back at the office. And if they don't take this information back to the office and do what you suggested, Trent and Brandon, and have a debriefing and transfer the information to the weakest link in the chain, then don't bother, because it's great that they attend these seminars and whatnot and gain the information. And our office is no different. Our agents go out and obtain CE and attend seminars and do all that fun and warm and fuzzy stuff. But we go back to our office and during our staff meetings talk about the most recent cyber issues. So you've got to push the information down.
Cybersecurity litigation, that's third-party liability. Adam can hit on that a little bit in terms of the coverages that are available and the policies that he sells. But just in short, there's a split in the federal circuits as to whether or not, suppose you've breached confidentiality or personal information, whether it's your client or someone else's, has been released through you, whether or not you can be held to and whether that plaintiff has standing to bring a claim against you. And there's a split in the jurisdictions. The state I'm in Indiana, allows it. An increased risk of identity theft is sufficient to establish standing for a lawsuit. Risk transfer and insurance. Adam, you want to hit on this real quickly?
Yeah, I'm going to keep this short because I know we're really tight on time. So I'm going to jump to this slide. And when we talk to law firms now, Trent's talked about it, Brandon's talked about it, the playing field's changed. Rules of professional conduct have changed. The bar has been pushed much higher for practitioners with cybersecurity, protecting your attorney-client privilege information, and protecting their money. And that's the thing. You have different things to protect. You have to protect your client's money, you have to protect their information, and you have to protect the professional services that you're providing them, okay? And all of these three things now are forever intertwined. You're never going to unravel them. Technology has now put us in this spot, and we have to address, how do we work with it? So to protect money, you have to look at crime insurance. That protects money and securities. It's that simple. To protect data and information, and we've gotten on this playing field of electronic, but I'm sorry, people, there are still a lot of law firms across this country that still have paper files. So we can't forget about that. We still have to talk about paper file storage and paper file security. How long do we retain a file? That question just hit my laptop a second ago. These are all big things that we have to talk about. But data and information is protected by cyber liability insurance. Then we have professional services. That's a legal professional liability policy. These three things are all connected, and I teach a class now through Indiana and the Midwest called Technology Malpractice, and it walks people through basically what we've talked about today on how we have to be aware, you would be aware as practitioners, how all these three things are intertwined. And if you look at the Professional Rule of Conduct Amendment from 2018 in Indiana, there's two key words here that I clue in on, and it's benefit and risk. Today we talked a lot about the risks, okay, which yes, they're scary and they're kind of overwhelming, but at the end of the presentation, Trent is going to bring this home and talk about three simple things you can do. But the benefit here is critical. There are tremendous benefits to technology, and that's really why we're here today.
And it's a shame that we're kind of shortchanging this a bit, but we've talked about it at the beginning, and I have mentioned it throughout as the requirements under the rules of professional conduct to not bury your head in the sand, essentially. You have to be competent as to these things, and you have to protect clients' information. Adam mentioned that. I mentioned the ABA Cybersecurity Handbook, and it's as simple as, you know, what do the rules tell us we need to do? How are we competent, and how do we basically make sure that we're not breaching confidentiality? And the ABA Cybersecurity Handbook says, you know, on comments in the rules say, you know, you can't stick your head in the sand. Adam hit on that. Look, our society is changing and continues to change, and rapidly. I mean, you know, if we could all think back, right, 5 years ago, what sort of technology we're using even today would blow my mind probably. And what technology my kids are going to use. You know, who knows? I mean, Facebook is going to be gone, and when my kids are older, if you will. But look, you can't bury your head in the sand, and so let's not freak out about it. How do we comply with 1.1 and 1.6? There are really three easy steps here, and it's all about being reasonable, right? We have to reasonably protect our confidentiality, and we have to be reasonably competent. What factors? What can we do? We've talked about them, and that really is, at the outset, invest in decent hardware and software, and update it on an ongoing basis. Do a review. You don't even necessarily need to update your hardware, but you should have some yearly check that your software, your firewalls, everything is updated, and that you're not, and so you're protected there. Encrypt and change passwords regularly. That's simple. And train and retrain. And if you do these three things, you're going to be in compliance with 1.1 and 1.6. I don't know if Brandon and Adam have anything to add there, but it's as simple as those three things. So if you remember anything, it's in today's webinar, it's really do your audit, figure out where you are and where you want to go, make sure your hardware and software is good, it's reasonably competent and reasonable. I just got a question that says don't freak out too late, but but anyway, if you follow these three steps, I think what we're required to do is be reasonable. We don't need to be techies out there. And Adam and Brandon, do you have anything to add there?
I don't. I think those three words, and I know Joanne, sorry we freaked you out, but this is scary stuff, and it's not presented to be scary. It just is scary in nature. It just is. But people like Brandon, people like Trent, whatever state you're practicing in, whatever city you're in, reach out to your business partners and your peers, your providers, and there are great people, for example, in Indiana. I know a lot of them, and these people I turn to, people that are on this webinar right now, that I reach out to answer my questions about professional responsibility, ethical behavior, data security updates. So don't freak out. Just, try to embrace it. But again, you have to change the culture of your firm. Trent just said it. This isn't going away. It's going to continue to evolve, and we just have to be as diligent as we can.